Hey, what's up guys, it's Oakley, and we're going to be covering the news that CA put out. Pretty epic stuff. The Lizardmen roster has been revealed. They had a whole video of this where they don't just reveal the roster, they go into a little bit of detail on the actual units themselves, giving us kind of what they're good at, some of the new mechanics. This video is just going to be talking about what the new units are that are available, some of the missing ones from the roster, and kind of potential what that could mean for DLC. And then I'll have a follow-up video that specifically talks about the new mechanics for the Lizardmen. And that has to do with this rampage feature that they've been talking about. But like I said, for this video, we're just going to be diving into the units themselves. So CA starts from the top. They've posted a big list. We're going to be going kind of unit by unit and fleshing it out. So starting from the top, they discuss the legendary lords and their mounts. So the first one is going to be Mazdamundi. I mean, he's been clear from the trailer that he would be there. Here they do talk about him having the option, of course, to be mounted on the ancient stegodon or platform. His stegodon is going to be Slock. So you can have different platforms that he can ride, and when they're talking about him, they obviously want to pay tribute to the fact that he is one of the most powerful casters in the world, and so he's going to have a new casting mechanic. Didn't really explain what that is, but they did say that it's going to be a new mechanic for him to represent the fact that he's just so powerful. Next they talk about Krokgar, and he's basically has a couple options that you can rank up in his campaign for his mounts, and it's going to start with just a cold one, then a horned one, which is kind of this unit that they're bringing back, which is almost like an elite cold one. So it goes cold one, horned one, and then Grimlock, which is the famous Carnosaur that he's famous for. So Mazdamundi is going to be obviously a very strong caster, not so good in melee, but Krokgar, they said, is going to be a very fighty lord, and they placed him amongst, I think it was the top two melee lord. So he is one of the oldest, according to the lore, creatures in the world, fought countless battles over time, so he's very tried and true, very battle tested, and in here they say he's going to be very tough and very hard hitting, and he'll have good control of his Carnosaur since he has a Beastmaster ability. And this kind of ties into the idea that other large units are going to tend to rampage more, whereas he would have more control over his beast. But we'll get into that in the future. I talked about other generic lords, so they talk about a Saurus Old Blood, that he can be mounted on a Carnosaur or a Cold One, and then you can have another Slan Priest. For heroes, they have a Saurus Scar Veteran, and he can be on a Carnosaur or a Cold One. They have a Skink Chief, and he can be mounted on a Pterodon, a Stegodon, or an Ancient Stegodon. And then you have a Skink Priest, and he can be on Pterodon, Stegodon, and Ancient Stegodon. Next, they start to go into some of the infantry, so these are going to be kind of the ones that we knew would be coming. First, they talk about the Saurus Warriors, so you can have basic Saurus Warriors with spears, and then the Temple Guards. So generally speaking, these are all very heavy infantry, very tanky guys, tons of health, pretty good armor, very heavy hitting. They have good missile defense and pretty high HP, like I said. They have an ability, I believe that's called Low to the Ground, or that's the way they described it, which gives them anti-charge bonuses. So yeah, these guys are great for holding down the main line. The biggest downside, however, is that they do have this kind of primal instincts thing, which ties into the rampage mechanic that I'll be discussing later. But essentially the rampage mechanic basically means that if you start to get on low health, your units you'll lose control of your units, and they'll start to have to run off in a certain direction. Saurus Spears can be given shields, and the Saurus Temple Guards presumably are going to be some of the most elite guys, and I believe will be won't have the rampage mechanic built in because they're so disciplined and so well put together that they just won't rampage, and presumably, you know, they'll hold out in melee till almost the last man, functioning pretty much like Chosen, I would imagine. And these guys are pretty interesting. They have both a halberd and a shield, so that is armor penetration plus lots of defense, anti-large, anti-charged bonus. These guys are going to be very tanky, very powerful units. So those are the Saurus Warriors that kind of step up, like I said, from the Warriors. Then you give them spears, and then Temple Guards towards the end. And then next they talk about the Skinks. So they say they have Skink cohorts with shields, javelins, blowpipes, and then you have the chameleon version. So when they talk about the Skinks, they say that the Skinks are obviously going to be light infantry. You know, they can get chased down by cavalry and annihilated, but they are still pretty quick, and they have relatively high leadership. They also said that I believe they're exempt from this rampage mechanic. So that's pretty cool. It gives them a little bit of variety, very high leadership, and very mobile. So they're fragile, but they're going to have to hide behind the main line and maybe flank around or just go around to do various little things. Exploit holes in the battle line or reinforce flagging areas. They talk about a little bit more of the units. So the Skink cohort with Javelin, they said, is a pretty interesting unit where it has pretty big unit size with a lot of javelins, which can be, you know, pretty high damage output, but they don't have many volleys. So once they've expended that, they can charge into battle. Next, the blowpipes, they say, are a harassment unit. Aquatic units that are better in water. Chameleon Skinks are the stealthiest unit in the game. So yeah, blowpipes and the chameleon skinks are going to be good for laying ambushes. Maybe they can even creep up through the grass, or if they're stationary, perhaps the chameleon skinks just won't be visible. So that's going to be an interesting unit. And then they said that many of the skinks are going to have access to poison. Another thing with the skinks is, as we said, they won't necessarily be subject to the rampage mechanic, and so actually once you get some of the dinosaurs, stegodons and things like that, and if you get the version that has skink mounts, then they will actually be under control by these skink units and thus not really be subject to the rampage mechanic. So that's pretty interesting there. Next, they keep moving along with the infantry. So they mentioned that the Croxagars will be here. They say these are troll-sized guys from the tabletop, very heavily armored, very big armor piercing. So I'm reading online here, someone says they won't suffer from stupidity, which I think other people are saying that wasn't actually a mechanic in the tabletop. I can't confirm, but anyways, Croxagars are there, big troll-like creatures, but I think they'll hold up much better. I think they're also going to be subject to rampage, yeah. Next, they talk about some of the mounted units. So moving on, they talk about the cold ones. So the cold ones are essentially these giant raptors. You have different variants that you can have. So the first is going to be Cold One Feral, and the feral version is essentially units that are fresh off the boat, fresh off the forest. They don't have any riders, and so these guys, being feral, are more subject to rampage quicker. But you know, they come at a cheaper cost. So these guys, the cold ones, have armor piercing. They're very fast. They say about the speed of an orc boar. Very powerful cavalry units that will be some of the most powerful ones and heavy hitting ones, obviously having high mass and very high speed as well as armor piercing abilities. So like I said, you can have the feral version, and then another step up is to give them the mount, and you can have Cold One Cavs. That's where you stick some dinosaurs on those dinosaurs, and then you can have a club version, which is the normal version, or you can give them spears, which will act kind of like the big ones, where the spear gives you anti-large. And apparently all of these are armor piercing, and these are some of the most offensive units. Then the last kind of upgrade for the cold ones, they say, are going to be the horned ones. These are kind of a stretch when it comes to the lore, but they brought them in, and essentially what they are is it's going to be a special cold one version. It's going to be swifter, wilder, more angry, and so essentially it's kind of like the feral version, no mount. But these guys are even higher, high risk, high reward, because they charge harder, they run faster, they're hard, they do more damage, but they're harder to control and can rampage more. So kind of a trade-off there, but that's cool. Next, in terms of mounted units, they talk about pterodons. So these are the flying pterodactyl units. There's a couple different versions. There's the pterodon with the fire leech bola, or just javelins. So these guys will fly around mounted by skink, so they won't really rampage as much. And in terms of what they can do, well, the javelin ones will just rain down javelins and then presumably can land and, you know, have some melee combat, mostly for skirmishing. And then more importantly, the fire leech bola ones are going to be very important. They have explosive munitions that they can throw. Explosive, anti-infantry in nature, flying and fast. Not huge range, but they function kind of like the gyrocopter with their explosions, but they also carry this giant bola that they can drop with, I believe, a single use. So just like the ability of the gyrocopters to drop their bombs, these guys are going to have that. So that's it for the flying units. Next we can get into some of the monstrous units. So they talk about the Bastiladon. So the Bastiladon has various tiers. First tier is going to be feral. So again, the idea that you can get low tier ones that are cheaper but are more subject to rampage. Feral versions don't have anything mounted on them. They don't have any skinks. They don't have any riders, and they're just there to be big, kind of tanky units that you can get a little bit earlier on in the battle. So the feral Bastiladon here, they say, is very slow but very tanky. And so it can soak up a lot of incoming fire and be a damage sponge for your army as it approaches. Other upgrades for the Bastiladon is going to be the solar engine. So this is something that people from the tabletop would be familiar with. It's essentially a giant laser. They mentioned something briefly about if you don't necessarily kill a unit with your shots, they may still be subject to some sort of blinding mechanic, which could essentially, I would assume, negate your accuracy or reload rate or something of that nature. Yeah, they say they're pretty good for focusing down high priority targets, but they're not super accurate, and I would presume they would have kind of limited range. Another thing you can do with your Bastiladon is mount what's called the Revivification Crystal, and this is new. It's not on the tabletop, but essentially what it is it's Lizardmen version of the Mortis engine, and it's basically a moving platform of healing. And what it does is, obviously, it's going to compensate for the fact that the rampage mechanic is usually triggered when you get to low health, but this revivification, you put it in the middle and it'll keep your guys at high health and prevent them from rampaging, so it'll be a pretty strategic unit. CA did say that, this is not really something from the tabletop, but they did get Games Workshop approval for it, and so yeah, it's cool that they're able to tie it in that way. Next big monster is going to be the stegodon. So that's essentially a triceratops. Again, you can get the feral version, and then there's different things that you can slap onto it. So another upgrade is going to be a stegodon with a giant crossbow. So it's essentially a bolt thrower with decent range. It's going to be some of the longest range, they say, that the Lizardman has. It can fire poisonous shots, I believe. At least that's what I'm reading online. And then it has skinks on the back, which can shoot kind of close range poisonous volleys. Another thing you can do with the stegodon is going to be to have a giant blowpipe on it. Oh, sorry, this is the one that acts more like a machine gun. Yeah, sorry, the crossbow one is more long range, probably armor piercing, with a little bit of action close range with the skinks on board, but the ancient giant blowpipe I'm reading here is actually the one that's more like a machine gun, very anti-infantry. So yeah, that one's pretty cool. I haven't seen really any images of it from in-game, only I think concept art. So that's it. So this Bastiladon, stegodon, and now we can move on to other ones. So they're going to talk about the Carnosaur. So this is the T-Rex looking one. I believe you can get a feral version, so that means it's unmounted, single unit, likely to rampage. I don't think they have it with like any particular upgrades. It's not carrying any equipment, but it does serve as a mount, for example, the Scar Veteran, or obviously Krokgar as well. But besides that, it'll just come by itself as a feral unit. So that's it for the available units right here. There are a couple missing ones from the roster that people are calling out. So for example, the Salamander, the Lizardmen, the Troglodon, the Ripperdactyl, and the Ark of Sotek, and the Engine of the Gods. So we can kind of go over those real briefly. So the Lizardmen one from the tabletop, essentially what it is it's this unit from the forest, and what it does is when it gets, it feels like it's under threat, it kind of will use powerful muscle spasms to shoot out spikes in all directions emanating from its body. So essentially what the Lizardmen do, or the Skinks I should say, its handlers do, is they'll kind of prod it towards the enemy, and then once it's close to the enemy, they'll like poke it a bunch with the sticks and it'll kind of explode. So that's a very interesting unit. So yeah, that's cut from the battlefield. I could see how it could potentially be very important, kind of functioning like a big baneling, but I assume it won't die. It will just maybe have 1 or 2 triggers for exploding before you have to kind of charge it into melee. But yeah, this one is missing. The next one is going to be the Salamander. So this is going to be another one taken from the forest with skink handlers that you have to prod towards the enemy. The description here says they are swift moving both on land and water with strong slender bodies, viciously sharp talons, and long powerful tails. They have ravenous appetite and are able to hunt and kill creatures many times their own size, spitting a caustic stream at their prey, finishing them with corrosive bites. So pretty ferocious creature that's going to be good at anti-infantry and perhaps even anti-monster. That would be kind of cool. But it has been cut from the game, and we'll discuss the reasoning behind that real briefly and what CA has said about cut units. Next is going to be the Troglodon. So this is going to be a giant monster unit, kind of like a Carnosaur, but more along the lines of a Spinosaur. It's going to be ridden by a Skink Oracle, and I believe the creature itself has venom on it, and I think they're thought to be blessed units, very rare units. So yeah, if you bring it to the battlefield, it'll probably have poison attack, and maybe a bit faster than a Carnosaur. Not as heavy hitting, but more geared towards perhaps speed and venom, and maybe a little bit of range attack. So that's the Troglodon. Next, we're going to go to the Ripperdactyl. So the Ripperdactyl is essentially like another pterodactyl, but instead of being focused on skirmishing and dropping bombs, this one is meant for dive bombing. So they have these big, thick upper jaws, essentially, and they have a very ferocious appetite, razor-sharp beaks and claws, and what they'll essentially do is they'll come in, fly overhand, and come and charge straight into combat. So a very ferocious unit indeed. Next, other units that are perhaps missing is going to be the Bastiladon, but with the Ark of Sotek. So we already said before that it has, they did confirm that they are implementing the Solar Engine one, the one with the laser, and that they made up the revivification version. Now it seems like they have cut, for instance, the Ark of Sotek version. This guy is supposed to be able to shoot out swarms of snakes. So this one's been cut. All of these might make their way into future DLC, but this one has been cut. Not quite sure why they decided to go for the revivification one rather than this one. Perhaps due to the fact that the Ark of Sotek, yeah, it's cool to shoot snakes, but in terms of like gameplay mechanics, it doesn't really do anything too novel. The revivification seems like it plays a lot more with the new mechanics behind the Lizardmen. Anyways, the last one that they perhaps cut is going to be the Engine of the Gods, and this is going to be something that you can mount on a stegodon. The Engine of the Gods here basically says that, what's the description here? Its most extreme attribute is the ability to seemingly slow down time itself, causing the enemy's perception to alter. It appears as though the entire Seraphon host is moving at lightning speed. Yeah, and it can summon raging celestial infernos and even restore fallen Seraphon. So as I'm reading this, you see mentions of Seraphon. This is from Games Workshop, and that's because the Seraphon are the new name for the Lizardmen when it comes to Age of Sigmar. So the description may be a little bit at odds with how CA implements it, but it's definitely another unit that they might want to pull out and use for the game. Although it does say here that, of course, the restorative abilities of this Engine of the Gods seems to have been incorporated a bit into the revivification crystal, so perhaps it's kind of too overlappy. But if they do expect to bring this to the table, to the video game, I would be interested by the comment here that says basically they can alter time, so perhaps it'll have the ability to give your guys a speed boost or slow down enemies, and it'll be maybe a way to use magic and things to provide buffs and debuffs. So a moving almost spellcast or thing of that nature. So that would be kind of cool. So that's it for the additional units. I do want to pivot over to a comment that CA said, because anytime CA releases a roster of units, people are going to complain about something that they missed. So let me go ahead and just read the comment straight from CA's mouth. So this was posted over on the forums. So CA Addo here says, basically, and I'll quote this: "We fought hard to get this much into the roster. Keeping units back for DLC is not how we got at this. It's a very rough negotiation between everyone involved: design, art, marketing, etc. Then we shuffle stuff around a lot until the work and the deadlines match the people we've got. Then we add a bit more stuff, because we love a challenge and everyone is like, you can't leave that guy out, he's everyone's favorite. If we ever run out of cool stuff, content for DLC, we'd just invent units or go way back to old army books and rare references. There will always be more Warhammer than we can possibly do. Kind regards, Atto." So essentially what he's saying is they had to strike a balance. The roster right here has a combination of things that they do think fills out the main roster. It hits all the different points of the army, and it creates an army that they believe will kind of meet the needs of the Lizardmen. It obviously doesn't cover the entire breadth of it, but they picked and chose the right units that they think will cover the basic tenets of the Lizardmen army model and the way they fight. So they've already got that, and of course, you know, they can't do everything. It's not possible to do everything. For instance, if you talk about the Lizardmen, Lizardmen models, they said they're not mocapping. How would you ever mocap a dinosaur? Even for the infantry, they said they're not going to use motion cap. They're doing it all separately. So that means they're much more expensive to get the animations right, especially for the big monsters. It requires a lot more art assets and animation time. So obviously some of that stuff has to be cut. You look at the salamander with the explosion, the mechanic of all that. That's a lot more resources that would have to be put into it. Same with the Ark of Sotek, something that shoots out snakes. They have to figure out the mechanics for how that looks, how do the snakes act, stuff like that. So That's presumably why those got cut. Now, it doesn't mean they're not going to get back to it. Presumably, there will be an excuse to make those happen in the future for DLC. CA has been pretty good about DLC in terms of pricing, transparency, and making it kind of worth your while. So I very much trust CA, and I'm glad they're kind of being upfront about this. So that was my take on that comment. So that's it for this video, where we go over the various units that CA has confirmed. Stay tuned for the second video, where we'll be discussing a bit of the Lizardmen battle mechanics and the rampage mechanic and things that have been teased along those lines. So that's it for this video. Hope you guys enjoyed, and stay tuned for more. See ya.